This section is about transforming and taking your organization from maybe doing 1 or 2 teams Agile, and how do you roll that out and scale it to the whole organization. We're only going to briefly touch on that here, and we're going to look at it a little bit from a tool set view. If you want a full presentation on transformation, I have a 4-hour training just on how to use Flow to do transformation. So I would suggest that you would take a look at that if you really want to get into the nuts and bolts of a transformation. There's a difference between transformation, scaling, rollout, and governance. In this video, we're going to look at how we deliver duplicatable, consistent results with Flow. The next slide is almost like a mini Flow in a nutshell. And it has all the components of how you would do the transformation and lead it. This includes using cascading vision with the link back. It includes using the AHA curve, and you'd use both of those in the individual team, product, and organization lenses. And then for the individual lens, you're going to look at using the 4R model in the team and product lenses. You're going to look at using the 4D model. And then up at the enterprise level for the organization, you're going to use the Agile Coaching Management Consulting paradigm with the infinity symbol, and looking at creative destruction and the ability to see and the ability to scale. And by the way, for scaling Agile, for the rest of the slides in this section in this video, we're looking at things that came from, or information that's come from version 1. SAFe, Scaled Agile Framework, is still the main Scaled Agile framework. And they give you some 5 top tips for scaling Agile. And as I've said maybe multiple times, I was going to say half a dozen, but at least multiple times I've said, remember, scaling is not transformation or rollout. It's a subset of transformation, and rollout is more your training plan and bringing everybody up the curve. When we look at how do we achieve these results, we use almost everything in the Flow toolkit in order to achieve these results. As I mentioned in one of the other slides, you're going to be using the cascading vision, the power of the one thing, cascading the VSPT down throughout the organization. And in the other training series, I talk about dilution. As at every layer, you're losing a portion of the message, so that by the time you're down to the individual, they're maybe getting half of the original intended message. And that's why Dr. Cotter talks about scaling, or your vision for the change needs to be communicated 10 times more than you think. The way he worded it was, we undercommunicate the vision for change by a factor of 10. So we need to communicate the vision for change continually, the water torture of good news, as Ted used to call it. And you need to be able to link back to the level above from the individual team, the project, if you're using those, definitely from the program level up. You need to be able to link that back. Use the power of the one thing. Don't overwhelm your executives with a lot of noise. Don't send 10 one things back up the food chain. Take those 10 and figure out which one is most important and send that back up the food chain. That way, your executives have a chance to even look at what it is that you may need and start to get a feel from the organization, what is it that they need to do in order to support the teams so that they can be successful. As I mentioned, with the AHA curve, you need to use it in all 4 boxes. This is an older picture where we still have the I, we, it, its, and I've substituted in individual, team, product, and organization instead. And for product, I include program, process, line management, and in the organization, the lower right corner, I include the portfolio level upwards to the executives. With the individuals, you need to use the 4R model and the power of that, and you can use it as a root cause analysis tool, and we show you how to do that in the Flow Certified Professional training. And since individuals are in all 4 boxes, technically you use the 4R model in all 4 boxes, and the same for the 4D model as well, because most of the time these days people are working in teams, so it's important for them to be within the process. And so the 4D model is used obviously at the team level and also at the product, program, process, line management levels as well. And you use those in order to enable your teams to succeed. When we get to the enterprise level there in the lower right-hand corner for the organization, that's where an enterprise or executive Agile coach needs to know when to put on the Agile coaching hat and when to put on the management consulting hat. It depends on if you're looking at anticipatory vision, disruption, innovation, things like that. They're on the left of that figure 8 infinity symbol, or if you're talking about operational excellence on the right hand side. It's not an either or, it's a both and. And it's something that I think is missed by most of the Agilists, that, oh, I actually have to be able to understand both of those and apply both of those as needed and be able to pivot really quickly to do that. And keep in mind that the language spoken in that lower right corner is the language of leadership. And primarily in those other 3 boxes, it's the language of management. And so as an enterprise or an executive Agile coach or consultant, you need to be able to speak the language of leadership and help the executives grow into their new role as an Agile champion. If you're not able to do that, if you don't understand that politics is a blood sport, you're going to get slaughtered. And there's even a video I've included in the series for the Flow Certified Professional where Jamie decorporatizes himself, and he left the right hand 2 boxes and went over to the lower left corner there back to the team level because he got tired of working with the executives, and they would ask him, well, what do you do? And then he would tell them what to do, and then they wouldn't do it because the political cost for doing it was too high, or they didn't adequately answer, hey dude, what's in it for me, for those executives to invest their political capital into this thing called Agile. If they're not going to invest political capital into it and put their weight behind it, if you don't get that executive sponsorship, it's really hard to achieve the results. You can achieve some results in the team box, or you can achieve some results in the product or program box in the upper right hand corner. But you won't get the full benefit and you won't get the full return on your investment unless the executives are with for the journey. They have to get beyond talking the talk. They actually have to walk the talk and model the behavior and help the teams understand, oh, we actually are going to do this. Because if they don't do that, then it's going to be really difficult for the teams to succeed. And so if the executives are within the journey and they're not just doing Agile, but they're being Agile, that's going to permeate the entire organization and achieve the results that the executive wants. So I'm always a little surprised when the executives are unwilling to change. Because if anyone should be able to change and change quickly, it's an executive. They should be able to pivot very quickly and adapt to new circumstances at light speed. If they're not able to do that, if they're too close to retirement or they have too many individual blockers that are blocking them from being agile, then perhaps it's time for them to update their resumes and find someplace else to work that isn't interested in going agile. So that's just food for thought, and now we're going to go into a little bit about the scaling agile. This is from the version 1 11th annual State of Agile survey. And you'll notice that scaled agile framework is 28%. And at this time, Scrum of Scrums was being reported as an approach. And now this is important. There's a difference between the scaling methods and approaches. Scrum of Scrums is an approach. And I'm not going to go into all the details on how Scrum of Scrum works. My observation is that it is not a scaling methodology. It's an approach to try to create communication between multiple teams. Okay, if you're trying to get cross dependencies or integration items or things like that lined up between a whole bunch of teams that are working on the same product, then yeah, you could probably use Scrum of Scrums to do that. But it is not a program level scaling methodology like SAFe or LESS or Nexus or DAD or any of these others. Okay? And so you see the percentages here. I would recommend that you go to version 1 and download your copy for each year for maybe the last 3-4 years. It'll give you a really good feel. We're going to go through some of the years here. We're going to go through 11th, 12th, and 13th. Remember, this is a very tool-centric, tool-set approach. This is not a mindset approach. And so some of the things that they're highlighting here reflect a very tools-oriented view of the world. And that's very much in that upper right-hand box of the 4 box that we use, where the program managers look at the world through a very specific lens. And it's program management. And so they're all into their processes and tools, and it's going to be a very tough road for them to switch over into Agile. And as they get better in Agile, they start to realize what are some of the weaknesses of each of these frameworks or models or methods or approaches. And so it becomes very difficult to continue to manage the programs the old way. Here's the 12th annual. You'll notice that Scaled Agile went up to 29%. Scrum of Scrums went down to 19%. Internally created methods is at 10%. DAD is up around 5%. Large Scale Scrum around 5%, and on and on and on. And some of them, like Rage, are basically falling off the page. So in the 12th annual version, the numbers are moving a little bit, but not too much has really changed. These tips for success with scaling Agile. And remember, scaling is not transformation. Okay, scaling, you're talking tool set. Transformation, you're talking mindset. All right, but what they have here is pretty good. You need to train up your internal coaches. That's number 1. You need consistent practices and processes across teams. Well, as long as you're giving the teams the ability to choose what they use. If you're mandating everybody's going to use Scrum, you're going to find out very quickly that might not work. Okay? Some of the teams might need to use Kanban or XP or any of the other myriad of Agile methodologies that are out there. And so now you're looking at synchronous, where everybody has to use the same thing, versus asynchronous, where the teams have the right to choose. But I guess if you're looking at it from a consistent standpoint, whatever you choose for each of those areas, you need to be consistent. Implementation of a common tool across teams? No, absolutely not. Again, this is reflecting a tool set view, and these surveys are done with companies that are already tool set oriented, so it's no surprise to me that this would come out as number 3. You cannot choose tools, common tool, across your whole, across all teams until all your teams have been using Agile for quite a while. And even then, you're not going to get any agreement on which tool to use. Okay? I know that, for example, Spotify tried SAFe about 4 or 5 years ago. Half of the coaches loved it, half of the coaches hated it. They threw it out. Okay? So their attempt to apply a common tool across all teams at the program level, that lived a short life. Okay? External Agile consultants or trainers, yes, absolutely necessary, because at best, your internal people will be generalists. You need experts with battle scars to come in and help you and say, okay, here's a landmine, there's a landmine. If you step on that, it's going to explode, it's going to hurt, and it will not be fun. Okay? And those external Agile consultants or trainers, they will help train up your internal trainers. And number 5, I agree with 100%, 1,000%. If your executives aren't with on the journey, if they're only talking the talk and not walking the talk, then it's going to be painful for you to do a scaled Agile rollout in your company. It will be extremely painful. And so, and the teams will know that as soon as this or that executive leaves, that it's going to be back to business as usual. And so, from a team's perspective, you almost have to start thinking about, okay, if the executives aren't really with, or if they're only talking the talk and they're not walking the talk, then we need to think about, okay, how do we fight guerrilla warfare? How do we do this so our team still succeeds, that we deliver remarkable results regardless of whether or not our executives are with? Because in the end, as the executives start to see the teams perform, they're going to go, oh, I want what that team is doing. They don't know why, they just know that they want it. They can't put their fingers on it, but they are trying to figure out what's the secret sauce, what's special about this team, how did they actually achieve what they achieved. That results gets the executive's attention. And so that's why you need the executive sponsor with to begin with. But if they're only in half-heartedly or one toe in the water, it's not really going to work. And so you'll still end up with a very frustrated team, even though within the team room, they may be doing Agile and Scrum perfectly. But the minute they step outside the door of that team room, they're hit with the reality of an organization that is in full defensive mode and resisting everybody to the max. So that just doesn't work. So make sure your executives get trained, even if it's only a half day. A half day is better than nothing. And if it's a full day or a couple days, even better. It just goes up exponentially. And then not just that they're trained, but that they're coached and mentored so that they actually start using what they learned and that they can model the behavior for their teams, because that's leadership. That's what leadership's all about, is modeling the behavior you want to see manifested in your teams. If your teams are angry, it's a manifestation of the leader. There's an old Greek proverb that the fish rots from the head. And so, sorry, managers, I don't, and executives, I don't want to, turn you off here, but it all comes down to you guys. You guys are the ones that shape the culture. And it's either going to be a servant leadership-led culture that supports the teams and creates a safe space for them to get their work done. If you're not doing that, if you're not modeling the behavior, your teams are going to have a really rough time. You're just going to frustrate your people and they'll leave. They'll go find someplace else where they can work, where the leadership will support them. And so it's becoming a more competitive environment out there. If you want to be the cool, agile company in manufacturing, you got to model the behavior. Now, in the 13th report, you'll see that scaled agile has now bumped up to about 30%. 19% don't know what they're doing with scaling Agile. I find that very humorous. Scrum of Scrums is still in there at double digits at 16%. Internally created is continuing to decrease and is now down to 8%. DAD, Disciplined Agile Delivery, is up to 7%. I don't know where on earth Spotify, it's not a model, has come from, but what they did at Spotify with the guilds, the teams, the chapters, and squads, and all of those things, that doesn't necessarily transport to other companies. Okay? There are ways to take bits and parts of that and apply it. But if you're trying to transplant what they did at Spotify 10 years ago, that's not gonna scale. And every coach, Agile coach that I knew at the time from 5-6 years ago when Spotify was around 750 people and experiencing severe growth pains. Now that they're up to 3,500 people 5 years later and have never really turned a profit except once or twice, if I've understood correctly, in their entire history. Now they're at 3,500 people, and not a single one of those original Agile coaches that I knew is still there. They all left because the culture changed so dramatically from being 750 people, where they were already experiencing heartburn, and now at 3,500 people, none of those original coaches are left. So this isn't to denigrate the Spotify model. It's just that even the guys who were there who did the scaling and who created that are saying, hey, look, this is what we did at that time. It's a snapshot in time. It was never, in my opinion, intended to be a framework with which you scale Agile and or even transform an organization. So this is a new one for this past year, and I just found it very interesting that was with. And then all the typical challenges that companies experience when adopting and scaling Agile. And you'll notice that they don't use the word transformation on any of these slides because this is all a tool set view, okay? And so their 5 top tips is get your internal coaches up to speed, get executive sponsorship. You have to have company provided training programs for everybody who's involved. Try to have consistent practices and processes across teams where those teams are working together. Where it doesn't make sense, don't do that. And then implementation of a common tool across teams that, again, keep it within the program so that you can keep your program reporting consistent. Trying to aggregate all of this may end up being a manual process by the time you get up to the portfolio level. And being able to manage asynchronous teams versus synchronized teams or synchronous teams. Those are two different things completely, and most Agilists miss that completely when they're trying to do scaling, because if they've never worked in traditional project management, they might not even understand the concept of what they're up against. Okay, so you can download this report. This top one is perfect because culture eats everything for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And organizational culture is at odds with Agile values, 52%. Well, that means half of your scaling efforts are going to fail right up front because the culture of the organization is not able to adapt quickly enough to that kind of change. Okay, so you can read down through these. I'm not going to beat this to death, but I love it that culture is number one and that people recognize, hey, our culture isn't going to be able to handle Agile. And if you get into some heavy manufacturing engineering cultures, you'll find nothing but resistance and pushback every time you turn around. And so that is absolutely true. But you can still have pockets of success using Agile. You don't have to constrain yourself and throw up the white flag and say, oh, our culture sucks, we'll never be successful. trying to implement this organization wide. Well, fine. Find those pockets where you can implement it and you can be successful, and then it becomes fighting a guerrilla war, because then all of a sudden, eventually, the executives will say, hey, well, this team over here, they're really succeeding. What are they doing different? And if they're doing Agile, that will get their attention, and they'll say, well, wait a second, I want that kind of results for all my teams. And so that is an organic way to fight the guerrilla warfare at the team level, maybe up to the program level, that you need to do in order to win the battle. Unfortunately, most Agilists don't view it this way, that they need to fight guerrilla warfare from the team level upwards. They think that, oh, well, we'll just do this organically. Well, we'll all be really old and really gray if we're going to wait for that. Okay? So go ahead and download these reports. You're going to be able to go through those yourselves. They have like every year for the past 10 years or whatever that they've done these surveys, and you can see how it has changed over time. But in this 13th annual, there's some really interesting things in here. And remember, this is only a tool set scaling view. And so they're emphasizing tool sets and being consistent across tool sets. And so the companies that they're surveying are companies that are already tool set oriented, and they're not mindset oriented. Okay? And so that's a huge difference that people need to address and need to understand. So this is the last recap in the video training series. And so we talked about how to deliver those duplicatable, consistent, remarkable results with flow. We looked at some of the industry information and data and trends that are happening out there for scaled Agile, and the top 5 tips for scaling Agile. And one last reminder, scaling is not transformation or rollout. And if you really want to get deeper into understanding the difference between those 3, you should watch the 4-hour transformation training series that I have on transformation. Application of this is many companies struggle implementing using scaled Agile methodologies. The problem is that the companies doing the scaled Agile methodologies are overemphasizing the tool set. They don't address mindset or leadership. So the reality is flow is the missing ingredient, since it integrates and includes the leadership mindset end to end. Without that, it will be really tough to use those scaled Agile frameworks out of the box. I would never attempt to do that without having something like flow in my back pocket. And as an executive or leader in the organization, you need to understand, if you want full return on your investment, you won't get it using just a tool set. You need tool set and mindset.